Hello and a very warm welcome. You're watching Gravitas. My name is Molly Gambhir. Let's get started. For the third week now, Ukraine has faced the wrath of a full-scale Russian attack. Civilian areas have been targeted. Russia has now launched fresh attacks on the Ukrainian capital, Kyiv. But does Moscow have an end game? Where does the invasion plan go from here? How far will Moscow go? And how far is it prepared to go down this road? Ukraine believes Russian forces could run out of firepower and the war could be over by May. On Gravitas tonight, we tell you why Ukraine thinks Russian forces are on the back foot. We also tell you why Moscow wants to take things a step further by targeting Ukraine's arms factories. As the Russian attack continues, potassium iodide pills are dominating headlines. What are they and why are they in demand? We get you a special Gravitas report. Also on the show, we get you excerpts from a special event that WION organized today. Highlights and key moments from the WION Summit on climate change, WION Climate Calling, coming up.
В рамках союзного государства.
This is day 20 of the Russian invasion. Russia has launched fresh attacks on Ukraine's capital. The missile attacks are devastating. The situation on the ground there is worsening. This is Kyiv. It looks like a peaceful neighborhood, doesn't it? But hold that thought for a few seconds. A man was walking down the street. It was right at this moment when a missile struck. Take a look. The Ukrainians had intercepted this missile, but they could not keep it away from the civilian areas. Kyiv was struck by Russian shelling today. Is Russia trying to take Kyiv? Ukraine thinks Russian forces could run out of firepower. Top Ukrainian advisors believe that the war will be over by May. So is Russia hitting Kyiv with everything it has got? Does it want diplomatic leverage by bombing Kyiv? On Gravitas tonight, we will discuss. First, let's tell you how the day panned out in Kyiv. Two powerful explosions were heard at dawn today. A 16-story building was bombed. Few other buildings were targeted as well. Ukraine says Russian forces are firing missiles on civilians. At least 4 people died in the bombings today. 48 were rescued. Those who survived say they were lucky.
Thank God, we stayed alive. Look here, a handicapped person was lying here that I couldn't bring away. I can't reach any service.
It is devastating indeed. A 35-hour-long curfew has been imposed in the city. Russian fighter jets seem to have reached Kyiv, but Russian soldiers are still on the outskirts. Reports say Russian troops are 9 kilometers away from the center of Kyiv, 9 kilometers away. Is Moscow making preparations to take Kyiv? The threat is real, but Ukraine says Russian forces are on the back foot. A top advisor to the Ukraine government has an assessment. He says a peace deal is possible in May. This is what he said. I think that no later than in May, early May, we should have a peace agreement. Maybe much earlier, we will see. I'm talking about the latest possible dates, quote unquote. So Ukraine wants a peace deal. Volodymyr Zelensky says the negotiations have been difficult. There are hopes, though, of a breakthrough. But on what terms exactly? The Ukrainian president did not share any specifics, but he did have some advice for the Russian forces. Zelensky wants them to lay down their arms.
Russian conscripts, listen to me very carefully. Russian officers, you've already understood everything. You will not take anything from Ukraine. You will take lives. There are a lot of you, but your life will also be taken. But why should you die? What for? I know that you want to survive. We hear your conversations in the intercepts. We hear what you really think about this senseless war, about this disgrace, and about your state. Your conversations with each other, your calls home to your family, we hear it all. We draw conclusions. We know who you are. Therefore, I offer you a choice. On behalf of the Ukrainian people, I give you a chance to survive. If you surrender to our forces, we will treat you the way people are supposed to be treated, as people, decently. In a way, you are not treated in your army, and in a way, your army does not treat ours. Choose.
Surrender and survive. Volodymyr Zelensky delivered this message in Russian. Later in the day, he spoke at a meeting in London. Zelensky demanded more weapons from Ukraine, from Europe.
We all are the targets of Russia, and everything will go against Europe if Ukraine won't stand. So I would like to ask you to help yourself by helping us. You know the kind of weapon we need, everyone knows. You know what kind of defense measures we need. You know what that our need is, the fighter jets. And without your support, it would be very difficult.
Zelensky is now making bold statements. Perhaps what happened on a Russian network gave him the confidence. Have a look at this. A journalist in Russia decided to rebel. She interrupted a live news bulletin on her own network to protest the war in Ukraine.
Надо усилить сотрудничество в рамках союзного государства, а на совещании в правительстве обсуждали, как сохранить.
Reports say this journalist was detained and imprisoned later. She could remain in jail for at least 10 days. She had also recorded a message of dissent. This was before she disrupted that broadcast. It is now going viral.
Unfortunately, in recent years, I worked at Channel One making Kremlin propaganda, and now I'm very ashamed of this. I'm ashamed that I allowed lies to be spoken from the TV screen. I'm ashamed I allowed Russian people to be zombified. We were silent in 2014 when this was all just beginning. We didn't go to the protests when the Kremlin poisoned Navalny. We just silently observed this anti-human regime, and now the whole world has turned away from us. And 10 generations of our descendants will not wash away the shame of this fratricidal war.
Those are some big claims. Do they represent the views of the entire Russian population? Are Russian citizens against the war in Ukraine? It is difficult to say. But Kyiv is trying to capture the public opinion in Russia. Europe is now rallying around Ukraine. The European Union has announced fresh sanctions on Russia. The bloc will impose more tariffs on Russian imports. The announcement coincided with a diplomatic mission. Today, leaders of 3 European countries said they will visit Kyiv. The prime ministers of Poland, the Czech Republic and Slovenia are going. They are representing all the EU member states. Europe's show of strength is admirable, but can it stop the Russian offensive? Can it protect the civilians from the bombings? So far, nothing has been able to stop the Russian offensive. Moscow is also hitting back at America diplomatically. Top American leaders have been sanctioned. The list includes U.S. President Joe Biden himself, the Secretary of State Antony Blinken, Defense Secretary Lloyd Austin, and other key members of Team Biden. Joe Biden's son, Hunter Biden, has been sanctioned as well. Even Hillary Clinton's name figures in the Russian list. The sanctions clearly send out a signal. Russia is on the offensive, both diplomatically and on the battlefield. The Russian forces are picking new targets in Ukraine. On their target now are Ukrainian weapon factories. The Russian forces attacked the Antonov factory in Kyiv. 2 people died, at least 7 were injured. Our correspondent Anas Malik paid a visit to that site. This is what he found.
These images are from the Antonov factory in Kyiv, Ukraine's largest aircraft plant, which produces the world's biggest cargo planes. On Monday, it came under attack. A huge convoy of Russian troops subjected it to incessant shelling. Satellite images showed burning fuel storage tanks at this facility. Also, the movement of Russian troops northeast of Antonov. At least 7 people were injured in this attack, and 2 are said to have died. Also lost in the attack was AN-225, or what the Ukrainians call Mirya, a one-of-a-kind 6-engine cargo plane that was once called the world's largest aircraft. Ukraine's foreign minister himself revealed that this aircraft was destroyed in the Russian attack. WION's Anas Malik traveled to the Antonov factory to assess the full scale of damage.
And I'm standing outside the Antonov factory. This is the only factory that produces large airplanes and Ukraine's biggest airplane manufacturing plant. It is here. Beyond this, it's in Kyiv city. Beyond this is the factory plant, which was targeted today by the Russians shelling.
Reports say that this was no ordinary attack. It was an attempt to weaken Ukraine's air power. Hours before it unfolded, Moscow had issued a warning, saying how it was going to dismantle the defense industry of Ukraine.
The armed forces of the Russian Federation will take prompt measures to disable enterprises of the military-industrial complex of Ukraine that manufacture, repair and restore weapons that nationalists use to commit war crimes with. We urge citizens of Ukraine working at these enterprises, as well as residents of nearby residential buildings, to leave areas of potential danger.
The defense industry of Ukraine is a strategically important sector of the country. It once used to be a part of the Soviet Union. It accounted for 30% of Soviet defense production and 40% of the USSR's entire scientific research. When Ukraine declared independence, most of the facilities and stocks went to Ukraine. Over time, the industry modernized itself by partnering with private players. This took Ukraine to the 9th spot in Global Arms Exporters list of 2015. This industry is also crucial to Ukraine's economy. It earns billions in revenue each year for the Ukrainian government. In the coming months, all its operations could go for a toss. Moscow says the attack on Antonov was just the beginning. It plans to dismantle Ukraine's entire military-industrial complex.
"20 days into the Russian invasion of Ukraine, and the blame game has started. Who went soft on Vladimir Putin? Who emboldened Russia? Well, UK Prime Minister Boris Johnson has found his scapegoat, his own predecessors. The Prime Minister has written an article on Russia's belligerence. He talks about the invasion of Crimea in 2014. This is what he wrote, I'm quoting. "When Putin invaded Ukraine the first time around in 2014, the West made a terrible mistake. The Russian leader had committed an act of violent aggression and taken a huge chunk out of a sovereign country, and we let him get away with it." Now, that's a serious allegation. Boris Johnson is basically blaming the West for emboldening Putin, that they let Putin get away once, so obviously he tried again. But is this an accurate assessment? Logically, it does make sense. Putin was clearly not deterred by the sanctions in 2014. If he was, he would not have invaded Ukraine once again. Having said that, the Russian president is not your typical world leader. Conventional policies do not hurt him. Back in 2014, that is what the world tried. Conventional policies. They kicked Russia out of the G8. They imposed limited sanctions. They promised to crack down on Russian oligarchs. They pledged to abandon Russian energy. But these were threats, and as it turned out, the West was bluffing. The oligarchs were not targeted. Russian oil was not abandoned. So naturally, Vladimir Putin was emboldened. How much of this debacle was Britain's fault? Frankly, it was a collective failure. So every Western country must share the blame. Nonetheless, let's look at how Britain reacted in 2014. Back then, David Cameron was the Prime Minister. This is a sample of his response.
We have to address the completely unacceptable situation of having Russian troops on Ukrainian soil. Countries in Europe shouldn't need to think long before realising just how unacceptable that is. We know that from our history, so consequences must follow if that situation continues, and we'll be discussing that as well today.
Much like Boris Johnson, Cameron was talking tough. He had some proposals as well. Number one, remove Russia from the G8. Number two, end military cooperation and defence trade. And number three, reduce dependence on Russian gas. The first one was achieved. Russia was booted from the G8. But what about military cooperation? Let me put out some numbers for you. Since 2014, British companies were granted 30 licenses to export military hardware to Russia. Put together, this trade was worth $4 million. Britain sold helicopter parts, drones, and ammunition to Russia. What about Russian energy? Take a look at these figures from 2021. 7 years after the invasion of Crimea, the annexation of Crimea, 4% of Britain's natural gas came from Russia, so did 8% of their oil. Boris Johnson was paying more than $4 billion for Putin's oil. Clearly, Britain's proposals were a flop, but they did make one contribution to European security. They left the European Union. This was a big blow to Brussels. Britain is the 5th largest nuclear power, the 6th largest economic power. So Brexit made the European Union weaker. It divided public sentiment in Europe. And do you know who led the Brexit campaign in Britain? The same Boris Johnson. The fact is that the West failed in 2014 and they are failing once again in 2022. Boris Johnson can imitate Churchill all he wants. He can tour European states. He can make arousing speeches. But at the end of the day, only one thing matters, and that's policy. And on that front, Boris Johnson has clearly failed. So far, the UK has welcomed just 1,000 Ukrainians. Compare that to neighbouring Ireland. They have welcomed more than 5,500 refugees. Just think about this. 2.8 million people have fled Ukraine. Out of this, Britain has welcomed around 1,000. That is 0.03%. Is this how Boris Johnson plans to help? His border guards were turning refugees away at the French border. They were asked to get their paperwork in order. He changed his policy only after intense backlash. What I'm trying to say here is leaders don't matter. What matters is the attitude, the resolve. And the West has consistently lagged both, whether it's Barack Obama or David Cameron or even Joe Biden or Boris Johnson. All of them share the blame for what is happening right now. Boris Johnson is right about one thing, though. The West did make mistakes in 2014. The problem is they are making those same mistakes all over again. Shifting focus now. Amid the pandemic, the politics, and now the war, the world has put climate change on the back burner. Have a look at the scenes in Ukraine. Climate change may seem like a distant threat, something we can deal with later. But scientists say that is not the case. Climate change will not pause for the pandemic. It will not stop during wars. So we decided to put the focus back. Earlier today, WION hosted a special summit on climate change. World leaders, international experts, government ministers addressed the most pressing challenge of our times. These are the key highlights, the best moments from Climate Calling, a WION summit.
India is committed to achieving net zero emission by 2070 and has set an ambitious target for itself and for the world to follow. And who better to help us understand India's roadmap than India's Minister of Road Transport and Highways, Mr. Nitin Gadkari. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming our chief guest for this evening, Mr. Nitin Gadkari.
All respectable dignitaries and dear friends. The climate, particularly in Indian situation, it is a big challenge for the country. We are believing in three philosophies. One is ethics, economy, ecology and environment. And regarding ecology and environment, we need to address three important issues. One is air pollution, water pollution and sound pollution. I got opportunity to deal with water pollution and now I am dealing with the air pollution. First of all, the Paris Climate Agreement, where we have already committed before 2030 and at the same time COP26 Glasgow UK commitment, that is net zero carbon emission, carbon neutral country by 2070. These are the big tasks, and our automobile sector is one of the important sectors. Presently, its volume is 7.5 lakh crores. And now I am expecting within 5 years, we are going to become an international manufacturing hub, number one manufacturing hub in the world. And now we will make this up to 50 lakh crores. And at the same time, this is the sector which is already giving maximum employment potential in the country. And this is the sector which is giving maximum revenue to the state government and central government by the way of GST. The most important subject which is touching to my heart, that is the alternative fuel. Tomorrow in my house, we are going to launch the first car on hydrogen in India. That is a pilot project. And the car is now in my house and tomorrow there is a big function for that. So presently, in place of diesel and petrol, we have to find out the different alternatives. So now the time is that we need to reduce the use of diesel. In the construction equipment machinery, I am insisting that it is with my ministry that you should have the engine, flex engine. But now they are not succeeding in it. But JCB, with my insist, they have made the JCB on hybrid. It is on diesel and bio-CNG. And now they get good order from Russia, 1,000 crore of this. So this is the important thing that we need to think about alternative fuel, which is going to create employment, going to reduce the pollution. The policy is import substitute, cost effective, pollution free and indigenous. So my request is, this is to be the technology for the future. Tomorrow at 2 o'clock, come to my house to see. And just take I will request Chaudhary ji, you just use the green hydrogen car and make the round of it and let's show the people that this can happen. Why I am doing it? Because many times when you give any ideas out of box, no one's ready to believe you. If talking about electric vehicle, then where will be charging? How it can be possible? If charging is not there, then what will happen? So people we should have a positive mindset up. And I am really confident that by these all efforts, we can reduce pollution.
This is our world, and it is changing with climate change. Rains have reduced in Australia. In India, Kaziranga National Park has become a net carbon emitter. Only 25% migratory birds have shown up in Albania this year. In In the UK, plants are flowering earlier than usual. The Amazon is losing its green cover, but the tundra is becoming greener. The world's coldest place is on fire. Animals and humans are being charred alike. Our homes are sinking. And our children are growing up in a dangerous world. This is our world. And it is upon us to stop this change. Let's start by understanding climate change. Session 1. Road to Change. Understanding Climate Change.
I'll start with you, Amina Gharib Fakim. You worked tirelessly on climate change. You have pushed for solutions, you've pushed for global solidarity, you've pushed for science-based efforts to arrest climate change. What does it feel like when you see that climate breakdown is happening faster than anticipated and the impact is worse than anticipated?
First of all, Palki, thank you for having me, and thank you for WION for giving me the opportunity to raise again my voice on this, what I call now an existential threat to humanity. Unfortunately, Palki, the world is still not waking up to this crisis, and it is for us, especially islanders, an existential threat. And I feel that until and unless we treat climate change as an emergency, we will not handle it as such. And this is, I think, where the conversation, the gap happens in the conversation. We are not taking it seriously. We are acting like that frog in that tepid water, which is gradually warming up. And very soon, there'll be no time for adaptation because we're getting too tired and we'll just end up in the boiling water.
Very well put, as always. Eric Solheim, you've had an extensive career focusing on climate change, on the environment, and you've pushed the private sector to do more. You've pushed for more investment in conservation efforts. But here we are, and in this day and age, national parks have become carbon emitters. What will it take for the world to hear the SOS call and actually act on it?
Thank you so much for having me on this important event. True, as Amina said, the problem is huge, but we are also more and more now stepping up to the plate and acting. I will point to a few Bs which are now acting. First of all, business. Business are now well ahead of the political leaders, and no nation is even close to acting in the way like say, Microsoft is doing in the US, IKEA is doing in Europe, or April, the world's biggest paper and pulp company, is doing in Asia. Secondly, Brussels, the European Union, is regulating markets in Europe in a completely new way. Thirdly, Beijing, China is now the leader in every single environment technology, whether it's solar or wind or green hydrogen or electric mobility. China is the lead nation. And fourthly, Bharat, or India, Prime Minister Modi has put India on a completely new trajectory, launching the green hydrogen mission for India, going big into solar. Very soon, India will be the second biggest solar nation in the world. So I see a lot of reasons for optimism also, while the problem is big. But we have acted more during the COVID-19 than we did for many, many years before. I think in reality we have done a lot more in the last 2 years than we did in the last 20 years before that.
Divya, that you've researched extensively on energy and climate change in India in particular and the world in general. I know a lot needs to be done. But the fact that political parties are including climate change in their manifestos, the fact that governments are actually at least making an effort to be seen to be doing something, would you say that it glass half full?
Well, thank you for that. To look at Because if you look at the assessments that are being done now and the science that is being generated, including by UNEP, the 0.5 degrees Celsius that for ourselves, but even with 2.7 degrees Celsius. So even with all made, we are far ahead even of 2 degrees Celsius. Know that anything beyond 1.5 catastrophic. We are already in many parts of the world, we are seeing disasters of a scale that is unprecedented. We've not seen lifetimes. But at 2 degrees, I think we cannot even where we will be and what are the kinds of impacts of climate change that we. To reach that 1.5 degrees Celsius, we need to halve GHG emissions in the next 8 years by 2030. So that is a kind of ambition that we need to have. And I think it is only with, we've seen a lot of countries make net zero commitments. We've seen a lot of businesses make net zero commitments. I think it is important that these long-term, mid-century net zero commitments are translated into immediate short-term action. Only then can we sort of, do we have any chance at all of that little window that we have for 1.5 degrees.
Right, and the window that is shrinking fast. Ken O'Flaherty, you've advocated nature-based solutions for Asia-Pacific. Water levels we know are rising in this part of the world. Indonesia, for one, is moving its capital city. 1/3 of Bangladesh was underwater until recently. In another part of the world, ice caps are melting faster than ever before. What, according to you, is accelerating this the most?
The increasing global temperatures are having devastating effects on ecosystems and biodiversity worldwide. And so it's impossible to say that one country is suffering more than others. But certainly in recent months, we have seen extreme weather events across the globe. These are having major impacts on economies, on communities across the Asia-Pacific region. We're also seeing problems around deforestation across Asia in particular. And we're seeing coral reefs increasingly threatened and damaged. And we know in a 2 degrees Celsius world, for example, 98% of all coral reefs should be destroyed, whereas in a 1.5 degrees Celsius world, there is a much greater chance of survival. And of course, these coral reefs are essential for fisheries, for tourism, and for the economies of major countries across this region. So we are being convinced as COP26 presidency that nature-based solutions have to be an integral part of all countries' approach towards tackling the impacts of climate change. We know that 1/3 of the most cost-effective solutions to climate change are nature-based solutions. We, therefore, as the UK, are trying to lead by example by allocating a much greater proportion of our climate finance towards these solutions across this region. But we also know that partners are recognising the importance of preserving forests in the region. So it was great to see at Glasgow in COP26 so many countries in this region signing up to the Forestry and Land Use Declaration. Our COP president was recently in Indonesia and heard about the work that they're doing there to protect their forests and indeed regenerate large amounts of their forests. And I myself was in Sri Lanka and Bangladesh very recently, and I saw firsthand how that work is underway to protect the mangroves in many of these countries, which are also crucial for providing livelihoods for the future and also in capturing the carbon. They are often more cost-effective than forests in that regard. So yes, you're absolutely right. Nature-based solutions have been a key part of our approach as COP26 presidency. Of course, alongside the other work on driving down emissions, achieving net zero, making sure there's strong 2030 targets, and eliminating the use of coal, for example, as well as supporting our partners on adaptation and loss and damage, as well as delivering greater international climate finance.
Indeed. Although was COP26 a success or not remains a question of debate. Amina Gharib Fakim, I have some very interesting numbers with me. It says between 2010 and 2020, droughts, floods and storms killed 15 times as many people in highly vulnerable countries in Africa, South Asia and South America as in wealthier countries. Would you say the impact of climate change is discriminatory in nature? And why is that?
I used to think that it was discriminating in nature because when you see the impact of climate change, you see mostly the vulnerable people actually being impacted. And here I'm going to be very blunt. I think that we're getting traction, we're getting visibility on climate change because the countries in the north now are also being impacted by climate change. And I think this is for real. We've seen that. We've seen fires in Australia in places that we never thought we'd see flooding. And I'm not going to say that it's serving anybody. It's not going to serve anybody. But I think now the awareness has been raised that this is now for real. And we have to tackle it. But unfortunately, we know what the problems are, we know what the solutions are, and I don't think we're moving fast enough. I see some countries, they're putting target to 2050, but I don't think nature will wait for us until politically we meet the target. We know what the problem is. The problem is emission. We have to cut, we have to reduce emission, and I still do not see how this can happen. And as what you said, what we've seen earlier on, with the war in Ukraine, I think climate change is being put back in the back burner. So this is, in a way, a welcome effort that WION has put this together, that it will bring in the conversation further again, because while the war might stop, climate change will accelerate.
I want to take this question to Eric Solheim. You've worked very closely in this area and you've pushed for more aid for less developed countries, and yet we see climate politics emerging as the biggest hurdle to climate action. There is a debate over historical emissions, there is a debate over who is going to pay more, where will the solutions come from, and what happens to developing countries. How do we expect to create a global response to a global crisis, given all of these fault lines?
I think we need to change the conversation, because the whole idea was first you prioritize economic development and you make a hell, of pollution, and then you get rich, you solve the problem. That is the old model, that's the 20th century. The 21st century is all about the win-win policies. All those policies which are good for the environment, good for people's health and well-being, and good for economy and growth at the same time. And we have them all. Green tourism, green agriculture, renewable economics, electric mobility, they're all available. And I think the environmentalists need to make a new conversation. They have tried to scare people into action. It didn't work. Now it's time to inspire people into action.
Would you say that, and not taking away from all the efforts that are being made at COP26 and then the upcoming COP27, that these conferences and dialogues make any real progress? Because while there is a lot of awareness, I think at some level there's also cynicism, and this awareness has not been converted into the sense of urgency, because one feels that these events have become talk shops.
Well, it does create awareness, as you have said, and I think some of the panelists have also mentioned the importance of having this conversation. But in a way, there has been a fair bit of cynicism, as you have said, because I attended COP21, and COP21, I think, was important for many reasons, because it was one of the successful COPs, because all the previous ones have been disappointing. And there had been one promise made. The promise was to get the climate fund, the 100 billion that we're talking about. And as we speak, we're still short. We still find that there's a gap. And I think at the COP26, I think Mia Mottley, actually she was very, very eloquent, and actually she was very articulate in highlighting the crisis that developing countries are facing. One of the reasons she actually rightly pointed out is the SDRs, the special drawing rights that developing countries should access. And we find that the climate change, the fund have not been capitalized, and there's still a gap. And the gap, as at November 2021, it was about $26 billion or 21, or something like this. So this shows, this is where I think the cynicism is coming in from developing countries, that the promises are not being met. And if we don't get access to this fund, how are developing countries going to be able to adapt? How are they going to get the tools? And one thing that I think many people, the conversation is missing somewhere, is that we are living in an interconnected world. And if the COVID has shown us anything, it has shown us how interconnected we are to each other and also to the environment. And this is, I think, something which has been missing in our conversation, because as humans, we have taken ourselves out of the environment, and yet we are very much part of it. And if we were to compress the 24 hours in the whole geological cycle in 24 hours, we find that as humans, we have existed for just 5 seconds before midnight. And just imagine the damage that we have done to this planet. So we are destroying the branch on which we are all sitting. And that is the question, that is the statement that we have to make to our kids. What are we leaving them in terms of legacy when they'll have nothing? And yesterday I was going around the city and I saw how we need to protect our soil. And in 30 years, there'll be no soil for us to farm on. And this is something that is not taken seriously. This is not something that is, of course, the dollars are not ringing perhaps enough. But we need to look at our environment. We need to show our children that we are very much part of the ecosystem. And the sooner we come to terms with this, the better it's going to be for us.
What would your message be to those who are fighting this war?
You've linked war with the species which are destroyed. So I think the first message we have to bring home is that there is no planet B. We only have this planet for which we have to fight, and of course we have to preserve and save for future generations. But I think if you look at war in the Middle East, let's take the war of Syria, for example, part of it is accounted to climate change. And I think we're going to see increased urbanization. And if you look at the continent of Africa, which is going to provide over 1 billion in terms of youth employment, employable people in 10, 15 years' time, we find that it's a continent which is going to increasingly urbanize. And by 2050, I think 50% of the continent is going to be urbanized. So the friction that this will create, and of course, notwithstanding climate impact, of course. So we are in a scenario which doesn't bode well for the future. And we are in a scenario where we'll find food security issues, energy security, water, especially water, because I think it has been forecast, I think the CIA has put in the statement that the next war is going to be the war on water. Transboundary water, fluctuating cycles, you name it, we have it all there. And notwithstanding that climate change has also impacted 1 million species which are on the verge of extinction. Again, I bring back to the previous statement I made that we are interconnected. So all the species we're destroying, they are in a way ensuring our livelihoods now. So what's at stake in the future when there is no planet B? So that's the question as far as leaders we have to actually embrace in the conversation.
Absolutely, and I think that's a good note to end on. I'm told we're out of time for this session, but thank you very much for joining this conversation, and we'd like to believe it's just the beginning. Thank you. India has been at the forefront of climate action, as many of our guests and dialogue partners have also pointed out. It is the only G20 nation that is well on track to meet its climate goals. India is also among the top 10 countries in the Climate Change Performance Index. As Prime Minister Narendra Modi put it, India is the only country delivering in letter and spirit the commitment to Paris Agreement. And spearheading this progress is India's Minister of Forest, Environment and Climate Change, Mr. Bhupendra Yadav. Ladies and gentlemen, we are honored to have him among us. Please welcome India's Minister for Environment, Forest and Climate Change and our guest of honor this evening, Mr. Bhupendra Yadav.
Let me begin by thanking WION for inviting me to this global summit, whose theme is quite relevant in our contemporary times: climate calling, the last chance to answer climate emergency. Climate change is a global collective action problem and therefore require a global collective action solution. India has progressively continued decoupling of economic growth from the greenhouse gas emission. India's emission intensity of gross domestic product has reduced by 24% between 2005 and 2016. Further, India has also overreached one of its nationally determined contribution NDCs announced at Paris Summit 2015 by already meeting 40% of its power capacity from non-fossil fuels as of November 2021, almost 9 years ahead of the commitment. The forests of India are teeming with wildlife. They support 70% of the global tiger population, more than 60% of Asian elephant, 80% of rhinos, and 100% of Asiatic lion population, making the India one of the 17th mega biodiversity country in the world. I would like to conclude by saying, and that is a motto of our ministry, the Sanskrit word is Prakriti Rakshitaha Rakshitaha. That means nature protects if she is protected. And so we must do all it takes to protect nature, because there is no doubt that this is our last chance to address the climate emergency. Jai Hind.
And with that, it's a wrap on this edition of Gravitas, leaving you with Gravitas images. Thanks very much for watching.
For the crew outside to come back.
And Kayla, we'd like you to fair lead at the base.
And we currently see Russia